Hey everyone, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and the Sammy Hagar Deep Dive series continues. We are working our way out of the 70s. As a matter of fact, today we're talking about his final studio album for the 1970s, Street Machine. And joining me, of course, is Mr. Martin Popoff. Good morning, sir.
Yes, morning, sir. Looking forward to this, and I've boned up using my own copy of the great Red on Black, forward by Greg Renoff. Very cool. But yeah, these books are really cool that you've been doing. I've got the Kansas as well. Been reading that. Yeah, so it's cool that you're doing a deep dive like this. A couple other buddies of mine have been doing this on the band Accept, right? On
Yeah,
one of their
no,
did the
yeah,
debut and
yeah, thank you for that, Martin. That was
yeah,
yeah, the idea is a deep dive. Yeah, it's of course it's tied in, right?
back cover.
I'm
Yeah,
trying to cover all the bases, and the idea of the book is the same as the deep dives. I'm just trying to let people know just how many albums that Sammy has done on his own. I mean, because
right.
there's a lot. And I
Yeah.
know that this is an album in particular that you have called your favorite on the Contrarians, which is an interesting statement, because none of those Capitol albums were certified. They were wildly popular, but I do think this is one of his most loved albums from that period. It's definitely his first that I've said it. It's his first that really kind of concentrates on hard rock. It's not quite as scattered stylistically, although I think there are a couple of remnants of his earlier
Yeah,
albums
I
on here.
disagree with you a little bit on that. I mean, to me, the funny thing about this record is I always remember from our old rating system that we had as kids, and it was always a 5 out of 9 or a 4 out of 8 sort of thing. So it's only a little over half hard rock, and then Danger Zone's kind of about the same sort of album. Those two go together for me. But you could find about close to half of all the previous albums were pretty hard rocking as well, right? But you're right. There's definite, and we'll get into it. There's a definite stylistic focusing down, stripping down, no covers, all that kind of stuff
Yeah,
to go with this album.
yeah,
And
that's a
it's
big
it's
thing.
not my favorite anymore. I would say 1013 is my favorite, and this has
1013 is a
gone down a
great
little.
album.
Yeah,
1013,
this
I had to go through all of these albums to
yeah.
refamiliar, especially some of the latter day ones. I had to um, uh, reacquaint myself with a lot of them because a lot of the latter day ones, and I talk about it in the book. I'm very honest about it. Some of them I just don't like. But
Yeah.
1013, that's a fantastic latter day Sammy album. I mean, he's still singing top of his range, and it's just got a lot of great songs on it.
Yeah.
Maybe when I say this is more of a hard rock album, I think that the diversions on here, when he goes softer, they're not as soft as some of his previous ones. Like there's no Van Morrison songs on here. There's no yacht rock on here because some of
Mhm.
his previous Capitol albums have yacht rock on them. There's
Yeah.
no question. And when he does get heavy, it's really heavy on this
Yeah.
one. So yeah, and it's also his first self-produced one. Not much of an album cover. None of his Capitol albums have much of an album cover, although his name is embossed. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And
Great shot of him too. I love that picture of him.
yeah, it's a cool shot. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
classy. And then the back cover, they're like looks like they're on a on ramp or something. There's
Well,
this.
I'll tell you a story about that. When I did the Bill Church's autobiography with him, he told me the whole story. Maybe even Sammy told me this once, but I think it was just Bill Church. But that thing they're standing on is a half finished overpass.
Oh,
So
okay.
behind them, it's just a drop off down to the highway or the desert or whatever. So yeah, it's literally you can only go up one side of it, and the other side of it is not completed yet.
That's almost a Contrarians Wednesday night show because you could pair that picture with that Doobie Brothers album that's got the half finished bridge, but you see the
Oh,
bridge part of it. I can't
okay.
remember which one it is, but yeah, there's
Yeah.
one. I think it's the Captain and Me. Like it just stops, like
Oh
it's still
yeah.
under construction. So yeah, and obviously, this album, this is where I got the idea for the name of the book, Red on Black. Yeah, but we'll get to that song. Of course, I got to have my props here. It's
Yeah.
my 8-track there. Crazy thing about these, I've said this before to folks, but if you catalog your albums on Discogs, I'm not even kidding, the barcodes work. These
Wow.
barcodes work. I did this with April Wine, Nature of the Beast. It
Yeah.
scans in as the 8-track version. I'm like, wow, that was technology that was ahead of its time.
Nice.
Something I find interesting is that it's hard enough to find these albums, these Capitol albums. It still kind of is. It's even harder to find Canadian versions. So I get a Canadian cassette of Street Machine because he really didn't sell a lot of albums up here, especially at this time. But yeah, so I was kind of glad to find that. So yeah, we'll get into it. I always, before I go to listen to this album, I always think it starts off with Trans Am for some reason, and it doesn't. It starts off with Growing Pains, which is kind of the same tempo. But what do you think about the Growing Pains as an opener?
You know, I think it serves as a microcosm for the album and a microcosm for Sammy's way of thinking at this point. It is really stripped down, simple. It's a hard rock song in structure, but the playing is very polite on it. It's very much like a Ted Nugent Weekend Warriors, Cat Scratch Fever sort of sound. You don't get much groove from the rhythm section. It just seems like it's arranged and performed for radio and for simplicity. There's something about this record. The whole record feels a little bit like this. And Growing Pains, I think, is the best microcosm for the album because it's fairly heavy, but not crazy heavy. And it's very traditional and conservative. And the thing I've noticed across a lot of the songs on this album is that Sammy sings with sort of an old traditional blues phrasing sort of thing. This one's got it's like a little bit of a scatty blues vocal on here. You know, he's got a bit of that going on, and then the guitars. You know, it's full distortion pedal guitars, but it's just you know, like it's just little bits of ZZ Topness almost.
A little Southern, isn't it? It's almost like a Molly Hatchet.
And there's more Southern on here as well, including in some of the mellow songs. So yeah, it's an interesting opener, I guess, heavy enough, but not crazy heavy. And all of a sudden, I remember as a kid, not all of a sudden, because it's leading up to this album, feeling the same way that Sammy's headspace isn't particularly in a heavy metal place, and that's why, you know, I've always said songs like this fit in a combination of heartland rock and proto hair metal. Right, Sammy to me is like the quintessential. He's one of those big proto hair metal guys where you think of, you know, Three Lock Box, and what's his Standing Hampton. Right at that point, he's bridging that space between John Mellencamp and proper hair metal. Almost exactly the same way Triumph does, but a little less. Triumph's a little less heartland rock and more like goofy 70s Canadian barroom rock.
Right? Well, it's funny because I know you did that episode on History in 5 Songs where, you know, did Canadians invent hair metal? This almost has that. I mean, obviously Sammy's as California as it gets, but musically, it wouldn't surprise you to hear some of these songs and think, is it April Wine? Is it Trooper? You know, who is this?
Exactly.
So yeah, it's very, very interesting. And he was right on the precipice of what would become, you know, hair metal, that commercial hard rock, and really, it's interesting because he pioneered that, and so did Van Halen. You know, they were kind of both in different ways. They were both coming up, and it was all over and done by the time they actually merged. But yeah, he's working in this sort of this field. Now, another thing about his Capitol albums that I would find is the sequencing is sometimes kind of strange because the second track on a lot of those albums mellows it right down. Because
bizarre.
Child of Man, which is a slower. Lyrically, it's very similar to Growing Pains. But
I like that. You almost get like a concept album feel coming up, but it's kind of a southerny balance, southern rock balance. So again, Rust Belt, Midwest rock, Michael Stanley Band, Styx. You're getting that sort of feel mixed with the southern rock, and then, you know, when you bring up southern rock, you know, you almost think of BTO sometimes. But yeah, it's very interesting that he would put that as the second track.
And it almost reminds me of something like Holy Man by Deep Purple. Like it's got that sort of feel. Or actually, it's funny. I was just listening to Nazareth's Hair of the Dog, but when it goes from Beggar's Day to Rose and the Heather, sounds like that to me too.
Yeah,
it's got that. But again, it's not mellow in the way that his mellowest songs are on, say, the Red album or Musical Chairs. It's still a rock sensibility. It's just an odd choice for a second track. But All Is Forgiven with track 3, Trans Am, Highway Wonderland. I mean, to me, lyrically, this sums up Sammy's whole ethos in a song. It's an ode to a car.
Yeah. Yeah, and we loved it as kids. Of course, it was crazy heavy, but again played with a very sort of sterile, polite sort of feel, even though it's kind of got tribal drums and stuff. And I'll always laugh at things like, is it called Trans Am? Is it called Highway Wonderland? Is it called Street Machine? Right? Because so it's got almost like three titles. Like Street Machine is such a befuddled title for this album when you don't even call the song that, and then the other songs aren't about cars either, right? And then what are you saying? Sammy Hagar is a street machine? He's a person, right? So you don't think street machine that way, right?
And
so,
and you're right. And I just thought of this now. That back cover would almost make more sense as the front cover because the Trans Am's on it, but the front cover is just him. So I don't think Capitol had any idea what was going on with the art department or anything like this. He's been better off with another one of those weird hypnosis covers, but it's a great song, and it's heavier live if you hear the live 1980 album. And another thing I mentioned in the book is like, it's too bad that Capitol didn't allow him any promo videos, because we could have seen, the Can't Drive 55 video here in 1979, him getting pulled over for speeding in his Trans Am. I mean, it's just, but it's a great song. It's got it's a shuffle, but it's a complicated shuffle because, like you said, it's got the hiccups, and it's got the midsection, with spelling out the name, and it's almost begging. It's made for audience participation, and yeah, the reason I call the book Red on Black, Red on Black, she's a street machine, even though that's not the name of the song. But it's great.
I like that you called it a shuffle in the book too. I noticed that, and I thought, is it a shuffle? And it kind of is a shuffle. It's kind of you're right. It's a weird kind of shuffle.
It's not as much of a shuffle as Growing Pains. I mean, Growing Pains has that Flirting with Disaster. That's a shuffle. Whiskey Man, that's got that Molly Hatchet thing. But Trans Am is a shuffle in the way that I'm trying to think of another song that's kind of like it, but there's more of a,
you somehow lean that a little bit into when people talk about the Bo Diddley beat, right? It's got a little bit of that to it.
But the thing is, like when you hear Growing Pains, it's almost got that finger snap, Trans Am is like that. It's just distorted as the production allows it to be, right? I think all of those, the really good rocking songs in his albums always sound better in their live versions. But this is pretty decent. I mean, it's pretty decent recording. It's the first thing I heard. Next up, Feels Like Love. To me, this is a pretty standard Hagar hard rocker, something that he would be expecting to write, right?
Yes, and that's one of the problems with Sammy. All his hard rockers are standard. They're just he's so conservative with the way he writes, and this is where that I've often said that phrase, Sammy Hagar hanging chords. I call that. This one actually doesn't have that, but to me, quite a lot of Sammy songs have that idea where, because he's a singer with a guitar strapped around his neck, when he goes to sing, he doesn't want to play anything too complicated. So you get the riff, and then you get just the straight chords when he
just rings out
quite often. But I bring that up because this reminds me of, again, a simple Sammy Hagar song. It reminds me of like a cross between Rock Candy and the kind of heavy songs Kiss was writing on Love Gun or Rock and Roll Over.
Yeah,
it's just it's a little bit like a Gene Simmons bass farts song, as I call them, right? It's dopey rock kind of thing.
It's like a ladies' room or.
But I do like, and you mentioned this in the book, I thought that was pretty neat, and I looked at it a bit of a different way. But you're right, when he goes from hi-hat to the ride cymbal. But what sticks out even more for me is he brings back that pretty cool riff when he goes into that second verse. So that's a little bit of a complication to it that I like. But again, another blues phrased vocal when you think of how his vocal goes on it. It's he's doing that kind of thing with it. I thought that was pretty interesting.
And it's interesting because he does, I know what you mean by the hanging chord. He does it a lot. And he's even said, it's hard to do both, yet he's got a second guitar player. He's got Gary Peel. So you'd think Gary would keep the riff going, but it's obviously, these are decisions that are, he's writing pretty much all the songs and then produced it himself. So it's not like, well, I didn't want it to be like that. Well, you obviously wanted it to be like that because here it is, right?
Yes, but there's always a rationalization for that, and that's like we're writing for radio, we're writing for
Yeah,
mainstream. You know, it's almost like Sammy is trying to surreptitiously sell hard rock to a mainstream audience, kind of thing.
yeah,
And so he writes the most conservative, polite, simple, easy to understand hard rock as possible.
yeah. And in case in point, you mentioned radio. His first, one of his more successful songs in the Capitol era, and there really weren't any, but he had a few that went in the top 100. And Plain Jane is probably the most beloved one. What I like about this song, it's a familiar progression. It's a very familiar chord progression. It's the A, E, F sharp, D. It's like Bruce Springsteen, I'm going down. It's been used a million times, but it usually always works. But what I like about Plain Jane is that it's not where you've got like a heavy verse and it lightens up in the chorus. It's actually the other way around. The verse is acoustic guitars and it's a little bit, laid back, but then the chorus, it's like, hits the distortion pedal. Um,
Yeah.
this was, you had mentioned on the Contrarians episode that you actually remember hearing this on the radio.
Definitely. And definitely heard this a lot on the radio as a kid growing up. And one thing that is kind of interesting is it's almost one of those songs that or this album, this song on this album illustrates that idea. As you're becoming a more knowledgeable music fan, your spidey senses go up and you realize, against your wishes, you would have thought, as a kid, absolutely, This Planet's on Fire or Trans Am's got to be the best song on it, right? But no, I actually, even back then, and then more so over the years, I think it's the best written song on the album, even though it's not the heaviest song on the album. And it's the only song on the album that is, as you just phrased it so eloquently, it is literally we called it a so-so back then, which meant it was a half heavy song, right? It's
Yeah.
not a heavy metal song, and it's not a light song either, right? Because of that duality in it. But yeah, it's got tambourine in it, it's got hand claps. As we go, as we learn more about Sammy later on, I think there's a little bit of despondence here about the falling apart of his marriage with Betsy. Maybe she's the plain Jane, right? And Sammy's, a shooting star and he needs more in his life, kind of thing. But he's trying to rationalize it and trying to work his way through no, this is good, the way things are. But yeah, it's got that triumphant chorus on it, super, the clouds parting sort of chorus, and then the verses are very enjoyable with beautifully recorded acoustic guitar in it. So yeah, begrudgingly, even as a kid, we kind of looked at it and went, you know what, this is kind of the best written song on this album.
And the fact that, I also think it's important for people to realize we can look back now and say, well, there's all these hard rock albums that came out in the late 70s, whether they were successful or not. But if you go back and look at an old Billboard chart or an old RPM chart in Canada, what the top 100 songs would be, and I like doing this on my show, on any given week, a song like Plain Jane butted up against the Bee Gees or Eric Clapton or ELO would have sounded really heavy, especially, you finish like a disco song, a station liner plays, and like to the ears, it would sound that much heavier than anything else that was on the radio at the time. So it would almost be like, okay, Sammy, we get it. You're mellowing out a little bit, but you're still doing it. You're still having a presence in the chart. So it's a catchy song, and I think it hit something like 71 on Billboard, so it got a little bit of airplay. But again, I just don't think Capitol was ever going to sink that much money into him, and because his songwriting changed a little bit when he went to Geffen. It was a little bit more ironed out and straightforward, like you said, more of that hard rock version of the Heartland rock. But it wasn't that different. He was still writing very, very simple type songs, and he had songs on these early albums that could conceivably have gotten some airplay had they been on some of those Geffen albums with the big push, right?
Yeah.
So we flipped the record over, and again, very strange way to start a side off. Never Say Die. It's sort of a slow, depressing ballad. I don't understand why this is placed where it is.
And again, it's bluesy again. But now it's the music that's more bluesy than the vocal. But yeah, mid-tempo ballad. But you don't really think of it as a ballad because it's not strictly a love
It's
song
not a
kind
love
of thing.
song. Yeah.
It's got that, a violent title to it,
Yeah.
which is kind of cool. And of course, Never Say Die. We already had Black Sabbath
Black
called the
Sabbath. Yeah,
album
totally
that.
different.
And it sounds like there's chorus effect on the guitar, maybe.
Yeah.
Yangy vocal, kind of a strange pinched vocal in places. But yeah, a weird one to kick off, and you wonder if he's kicking it off with this because he's super proud of it. Could be. But again, when he does these songs, whether they're the heavy songs or the light songs, there's just not enough tracks utilized in it, I don't think. And
Yeah. It's
again,
almost like they were limited. Like, they're like,
yeah.
well, we got 12 tracks. That's all. That's it.
Yeah. So again, you might rationalize that and say, no, keep it simple, man. We could have a hit, maybe not with this one, but we could have a hit with some of these songs if we keep them simple and we don't layer them up with stuff and have them too muddy on radio or whatever. But I would have thought this is one you could add a little more production to.
The other thing about this, and yeah, it's very obvious when you listen to the background vocals that "Ooh, Never Say Die." That's Barry Goudreau and Sid Sheehan and Brad Delp from Boston on those
Or are they on
high.
this one? I thought they were on just Falling. Was it Falling in Love, or
Well,
are they on both?
I'm guessing they're on both because when I hear those high backing vocals, that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like the Boston, and he's had them on a few tracks because I guess they toured together for like 2 years in the late '70s. So that kind of elevates it a little bit. But again, all is forgiven because next up, one of his heaviest ever songs, "This
Yeah.
Planet's on Fire." I mean, this is a speed rocker, 1979. Like this has to be one of the heaviest major label songs, not albums, but just individual songs to come out that year because it's got that menacing title, "This Planet's on Fire, Burn in Hell." 5 years before Twisted Sister, right? So,
Exactly.
what's this about? And this must have, I mean, this must have blown you guys away,
Yeah.
not expecting to hear something this heavy out of Sammy.
Yeah, that was really cool. Getting that, and that the riff is really neat on it. The chorus is a little bit of a letdown. It's a little bit of a Kiss chorus on it, but yeah, you got the Satan's Desire in there. But that trilly riff is very cool. And again, if you think about just the vocal, strip the vocal out in your head, it's kind of a bluesy vocal.
Yeah.
So it feels like a little bit of like a call and response sort of vocal, or a stabbing bluesy vocal. And then Megadeth's version, what this is another one of those songs where I think it's good for a Sammy Hagar song and it's good for 1979, and it's kind of breaking records and being extreme for 79, but set against fast Megadeth songs, because Megadeth covered it later on. And Dave did the dual vocal with Sammy on it. This is one of those where you go, okay, obviously Dave Mustaine's thinking exactly like we're thinking as a kid. This is just blowing his mind. It's so heavy and stuff. But it's also one of those songs where you go, okay, well, now compare it to a bunch of fast Megadeth songs, and it's not a very good song. So it feels to me, and I don't think that version is particularly exciting or inventive. I know they sped it up a little bit, and he's got a few extra little parts in there. But the funny thing, often when thrash bands or super heavy bands cover these songs, you hear that Dave's pushed into a place where he's got to sing melodic, and it sounds really odd hearing Dave sing this song, right?
So I think it's very important to look at it in context. Like, okay,
yes,
you hear
in context, it's
2022
very
or
heavy.
whenever it came out, and you're like, doesn't sound very heavy. Like, you got to remember this came out in 1979. It's like when you hear, well, I don't know, maybe Metallica Stone Cold Crazy is a bad example because that still sounds heavy, but that was groundbreakingly heavy in '74. Yeah, that's not a good example. That's a more complex.
Well, there are a lot. I mean, by '79, there's been a lot of heavy metal, most of it from the UK. I mean, I've done whole podcast episodes on this idea, right? But and by '79, you've got Riot Narita's coming out in '79, and they've already had the previous album, Rock City. So there's a Rainbow's been around, Priest has been around, and stuff. So so I'll push back a little bit on your saying it's one of the heavier things on major labels, because everything's on a major label in the '70s. There are no minor labels, right?
That's true.
But there's still, even though bands are on major labels, there's still small budgets. And and not making a lot of money and not selling a lot of records, but they're all made in the same studios. They're all made with major producers and stuff, right? So yeah, but hearing it from Sammy, it's a pretty heavy song. But he's had a few. He's had 3 or 4 pretty heavy songs by this point as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
just think
it's so
kind of cool
Ted
that
Nugent though. It's so Tom Werman produced Ted Nugent things. It's just really tight and small
it
sounding.
does sound like a Tom Werman production, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's especially the drums. Yeah. But yeah, in context, it's a pretty heavy song from him. And then, the rest of to me, the rest of the album, we've heard the best that there is to hear on the album, I think. Next up, we've got Wounded in Love, which is apparently credited to his, like you said, his wife at the time, Betsy, for some reason now, was that. I'm not saying she couldn't write the song, but was that just a nod, or was it, something to not pacify, but you know what I mean? Like some in an olive branch extended. Cause I know like that marriage was on the rocks for a long time.
Yeah.
Before.
The best way to put it is that a way to include her in the, this all encompassing career that's
his world. Yeah.
So, but she definitely could be involved with. Obviously, she's not involved in the music of something like this because it's a heavy one again, right? Tribal
it's
drums, kind of
lung-headed
heavy. Yeah, it's again this idea of straddling hard rock, trying to spoon feed hard rock into heartland music, and then also coming off like Kiss.
Yeah, especially coming right after This Planet's on Fire. It's quite a it's quite a whiplash as far as the musical change. And Falling in Love is a full-on ballad, but it's it is a rock ballad. Again, it's not one of these easy listening things he did like Catch the Wind or one of those earlier ones. But there's not much there, right?
Oh, I think it's somewhat reminds me of the early albums too, because it's kind of like Jimmy Buffett, Birdsey. It's got 3/4 time in it as well. I was thinking Bobby Darin, Roy Orbison reminds me of that a little bit as well. There's Piano by Mark Jordan. It sounds like grand piano to me. This is the one with the Boston backing vocals. So this to me sounds like a Van Morrison song, but he's written it. And that's one of the cool things about this album is there's no covers on it, right? There's no crazy diversions in that way. But yeah, it is to me, it does feel like a fall back to 9 on a 10 scale or musical chairs or Sammy Hagar, right? A little bit, but yeah, it's the first one like this on the album, which is kind of bizarre. So you're getting it towards the end.
That's another thing that makes me say this is a harder rocking album, because normally by the time you get to the penultimate song on an album, you've already had 3 of these. And here we've kind of got the first one. But you're right, it is a little more of a throwback. And I think another song that's a throwback is the last track, Straight to the Top. I just don't care for this song. To me, this is one of his, I think I refer to one of the songs like it's one of his rah party rockers that just kind of, I don't care for this one at all.
To me, it's almost like surprising. Did Sammy Hagar invent the rockabilly craze? Right? That Queen, that we give credit to Queen for inventing.
Queen and like the Stray Cats and
this is totally a rockabilly song. It's a light shuffle, so it's another shuffle, but it's a light shuffle feel. So it reminds me of Elvis Presley. It's acoustic guitars. It reminds me of Van Morrison a little bit as well, but yeah, very bizarre. Putting a song at the end of the album, and all of a sudden you've introduced a completely new style he's never done before.
Yeah,
because it is totally rockabilly to me. And then for a rockabilly song to have it called Straight to the Top, you would think, looking at the back cover as a kid, that would be another heavy song,
a heavy one. Right?
Yeah. It sounds like a I'm gonna win a world beating sort of song, but it's not that at all. It's the most modest song on the album. It's the most casual song, but the last 2 songs are the most light and cheerful songs on the album. So when you say hard rock album, I almost think like, okay, there is the hard rock and there is more of that than on any of the other ones by a little bit, but the other mellow songs are at least serious and semi dark. But not Falling in Love and not Straight to the Top.
Straight. You're right. I mean, it must have been a challenge trying to figure out what songs were the heavy ones from the titles, because I always say this about Whitesnake, because you look at the back of a Whitesnake album and you're like, I can't tell which are going to be the heavy ones and which ones are going to be the ballads, because most of them are love in the title. So
Yeah.
it's, and then this one, yeah, you've got, feels like love. Well, that could be a ballad. Well, it's not,
Mhm.
uh, and straight to the top, like straight to the top sounds, straight through the heart, or it
Mhm.
sounds anthemic, and it's not. It's very lighthearted. Maybe it would have made more sense to kick off side two with this song than Never
Mm.
Say Die.
Yeah.
But then again, what would you close with? So, like all of these Capitol albums, peaks and valleys, but I do notice an improvement. Like there's more memorable songs per album. It's just in very small increments. But I think that there's a reason why this album, for this early stuff, is generally considered to be one of his best. When the people that I've talked to so far, it's either this one or Danger Zone, which kind of makes sense because that's the end of his Capitol contract, and he's
You,
just on the verge.
yeah. I like the way you put it, in improvement, but if I'm thinking of a word that gets more to the point, it's almost like there's more intention and there's more of his own personality in it. There's less clutching at straws. There's less guest musicians. Um, so all of that, the scatter shot idea, like, oh, what's going to work sort of thing, or
Yeah,
what's going to possibly be a hit. There's less novelty to it
yeah.
than on some of the old ones. So it seems like it's more distilled. It's more him being Sammy, deciding on a direction, picking something here. And I think one of the reasons, as I mentioned before, that takes you to that place is it doesn't sound like there's a lot of tracks used
No, it's
across this
very
album.
bare bones. And I think another reason that there's always a reason when you look back, and when you look back and you get into a catalog all at once, you don't always notice it. But when you really get into why things sound the way they do, why this album sounds the way it doesn't sound like 3 years ago or three albums ago. He had just put out the live album All Night Long, or if you're in the UK, Loud and Clear. And it was his most successful album to that point. So maybe he thought, maybe I need more of that approach, that live off the floor approach. And maybe that's why this one, and because of that success, maybe Capitol said, okay, produce it yourself. You've sold a few records. Like that 9 on a 10 scale, 4 of the 9 songs on there are covers. It really weird. Like they were really trying to push him as a singer songwriter, and yet they feed him almost half the album of Van Morrison and Bob Welch, and like it's very strange. So by this point, yes, he has a little bit more clout. I'd be curious. We I know that both of us have talked about this at different times, but I wonder how many records he actually sold, each album for Capitol Records, and what was his biggest selling, and how many did it sell? Like, did it sell 300,000 copies? Did it sell 350? I don't think any of them were. I don't think any of these albums would be teetering on gold status, but he must have sold a decent amount to be able to, tour the way he did.
I would guess less than that. I mean, I'm sure I probably Bill Church and I talked about this in his autobiography. So there'd be some more answers and a lot of good trivia about these albums in there, frankly, as well. But I would think less than that. I would think
Or
I
like
would think
two,
150s to twos.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
maybe less than that for the earlier ones.
I would think because it's the hardest one to find is by far 9 on a 10 scale. And usually when you do get one, it's a reissue,
Mm-hmm.
an old reissue, you know what I mean? But you don't get an original
Yes.
one. So there you go, folks. That's what we think about Street Machine. Here he is, Street Machine.
Yeah.
um, so yes, so Martin, I mean, you've always got a million things going on. Contrarians, you've got History in 5 Songs, always working on new books. If you're a Van Halen fan, be sure and check out VH at 50. And what's going on? What's on the horizon now that you can talk about?
Well, let's see. So the latest books that have actually come out are the 2 Genesis panel books and Judas Priest album by album. So those are out now, and you can get those at martinpopoff.com. The next big one to come out is the mammoth Hallowed by Thy Name, the unofficial Iron Maiden Bible, and that's 666 pages. I think it's over 300,000 words, 400 pictures in it, probably full color throughout. It's the biggest thing I've ever put out, and that's coming out on my birthday next year. And a few other things in the fire. I don't know if they've been announced yet, so I can't really talk about them. But yeah, History in 5 Songs is the audio podcast, and that's every week. We've got an interesting one coming up. Rush on Aging. or Russian mortality, I think it is, and it's no early Rush. It's like literally just looking at the '70s album. So, but yeah, that's always coming on. And then we've got the Contrarians as well, and I do a podcast with John Gaffney called "Kicked in the Teeth," an AC/DC podcast as well.
Yeah, and you'll find Martin on Pete Pardo Sea of Tranquility every Friday at the Funhouse. It's always fun to see what they've come up with there, and it's interesting. So, a couple things about the Iron Maiden book. Did you have to go back and amend that when Paul Di'Anno passed away, or was it already?
Yeah, at the very last minute, and I don't even know if it's good. It was in time to go in, but they asked me to put just like a 1-page sort of in memoriam at the end, and we did that.
You had to do the same thing with your final Rush book too of the trilogy, right? When Neil died.
I think so.
Yeah,
I believe that happened. Yeah, right around that time. Yeah.
And it's funny, here we're talking about Sammy Hagar and Megadeth covering Sammy Hagar. I mean, Iron Maiden did two, Paul and Bruce, they both did I've Got the Fire by Montrose, which is unlike This Planet's on Fire, that's a really cool, complicated 70s hard rock song. Yeah. And I think they also did Space Station #5 as a B-side, didn't they?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a whole different thing. That's Ronnie Montrose writing the riffs, and that stuff is its own. Yeah. Its own thing. Yeah. So there you go. Thanks, Martin, for doing this, folks. I'm going to link below to Red on Black, the listener's guide to Sammy Hagar. If you want to know more about the man's solo stuff, of course, there's stuff on his band situations in there too. As a matter of fact, there it is, right in the middle. That's him from the cover
book as well.
Man, this is yes, so thank you.
Yeah, beautiful layout too. Yeah, there's a lot of good information in here, and I know the Kansas guys themselves have appreciated it, right?
Yeah, a couple of them. A couple of them have been gotten back to me, especially Carrie, which was amazing. So there you go. The Sammy Hagar deep dive will continue. We are just about to head into the 80s, but for now, Street Machine, go put it on, listen to it. Do you agree, disagree? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Still got a lot more people watching the videos than are subscribed. And if you're literary minded, go on to Amazon, write me a short review about my books and Martin's. Makes a big difference. But I will say, if you're going to order Martin's books, order them from his website. So there you go. Thanks a lot, Martin, for doing this.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for watching. Tim's Vinyl Confessions. We'll see you later.